Hello, fellow humans. My name is Vlad Bunea, and this is Economy for Life. Today, I will talk about the state of degrowth in Canada. Let's begin with the shocking statement by David Suzuki, considered to be the most famous environmentalist in Canada alive, on the celebration of his 90th birthday.
Every parent in this room ought to be concerned about what we're leaving them. And we cannot continue to allow the economy or politics to set the bottom line. We can't do that. And I know this is a hard pill for many of you who are in the business sector and people coming up and telling me how we're trying to do it, but you're caught up in the system. It's a system, the economic system, the capitalist system we're built on, that is built on, has left nature out and is built on the creed of cancer, endless growth. The global economy is now way too big for the planet to take it. And growth is driving us very rapidly over that ditch. And yet all of our solutions to problems like climate change are incremental changes, trying to shift things. But we haven't seen that it's the very system, the drive for profit. And it's not only that you're content with 5% profit every year. We've got to grow the profit. This is the creed of cancer, and it's impossible to maintain. But no politician or business person is even going to talk about no growth economy, and we have to go into degrowth. That's where it's at. But it's political or economic suicide to talk about that.
David Suzuki made this statement on March 27 at the Canadian Club Toronto, a not-for-profit that was founded in 1897. The club invites heads of states, executives, Nobel laureates to talk about the state of the world. The next event of the Canadian Club Toronto is featuring a panel of venture capitalists. I'm very curious what they have to say. Recently, the club featured guests who had this to say.
Measures in the budget will help unleash over $1 trillion in investment over the next 5 years. And that alone will increase our GDP by 3.5%. Our risk is that this economy doesn't grow. Our risk is that doesn't grow is too strong, sorry, strike that. That was Chatham House rules. That one is Chatham House rules. I did not say our risk is this economy doesn't grow. Our risk is that this economy, that was a comma, our risk is the economy doesn't grow fast enough.
And our business model is one of really growing our domestic markets around the world, but also exporting.
We have the talent and ingenuity to transform that potential into growth.
What we need instead is getting more economic growth in this economy, and I think tax reform has to focus on that right now.
And we really are well positioned for growth in this new environment.
David Suzuki seems to come from another planet when we compare his statement about degrowth with what other speakers had to say. If we search for degrowth on the Government of Canada's website, we find exactly 10 search results. One of them, titled "Will Degrowth Become Necessary by Itself?", refers only to the province of Quebec, and it talks about management of commercial forests based on resilience, quotas at tourist sites, ending planned obsolescence, and a 4-day work week. One article in Corporate Knights magazine from 2025 is titled "Why the Degrowth Movement Thinks It Can Do Abundance Better." The article presents degrowth favorably as a world with fewer stresses. An article from 2022 published by the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives reported that activists expressed concern that the discourse of degrowth would not resonate and that might impede meaningful action on the ground. They write, their responses suggest that the terms of political debate and public opinion have been too constricted by powerful interests to allow for degrowth's breakthrough into the mainstream. In the Canadian context, the embrace of neoliberalism combined with the political dominance of fossil fuel companies, which are the most active lobbyists in the country, presents specific challenges for degrowth. Meanwhile, I participated in 2 public events recently in Toronto. On March 10th, we had the screening of the documentary The Cost of Growth. The film follows climate activists as they travel through regions such as Italy, Serbia, and Sapmi in Norway. They document local communities resisting extractivism, which is the large-scale extraction of natural resources for economic gain. We had a sold-out event and a wait list. There was huge interest in the event. Here's what some people had to say in reaction to the film. How can we feel more empowered to influence positive change in the global economy? I feel ashamed that us humans are not doing pretty much anything to improve every single human's life, let alone animals, let alone the planet. I'm enraged at us humans for mindlessly consuming, oblivious of our imminent demise. How do we slow down the plane and save everyone? Small can be impactful, yet I do not act when others I admire do. On March 4th, I did a talk for the Canadian Association for the Club of Rome, in which I insisted on the fact that degrowth must be a mainstream topic in Canada. I talked about the need to establish a culture of limits and to end the colonial practices of Canadian corporations. After the talk, someone asked what can they do different in order to be aligned with a degrowth-like lifestyle. In their opinion, they were doing everything they could through their consumption habits. We have recently launched a degrowth research circle at York University, where we attempt to establish a network of researchers from across Ontario at first. Our aim is to deliver degrowth research in a coordinated fashion and advance degrowth research for the general public. In Quebec, the research group Polemos has been writing about degrowth in French since 2020. The degrowth movement has started in Quebec in 2007. English-speaking Canada is much slower at talking about degrowth, a word that appeared in English only in 2008. Why should degrowth be so important in Canada in the first place? David Suzuki reminded us that the breach of planetary boundaries makes degrowth an absolute necessity in Canada. The tensions around the production of fossil fuels in the province of Alberta are at their peak. Even the center-left New Democratic Party, when they were in power in Alberta, they did not implement a plan to end the extraction and production of fossil fuels. Recently, the federal NDP have elected a new leader in the person of Avi Lewis, the husband of famous journalist Naomi Klein. Both Lewis and Klein have written about the criminal damage done by capitalism to the environment. Lewis had co-initiated in 2015 the famous LEAP manifesto that called for degrowth policies such as less working hours, ends to fossil fuel subsidies, energy democracy, etc. The NDP have excluded last year from their leadership race socialist Yves Engler, who had degrowth on his campaign platform before he decided to remove it. A couple of years ago, I delivered a degrowth memo into the hands of the previous federal NDP leader, Jagmeet Singh. Of course, I never heard Jagmeet Singh ever utter the word degrowth in public. The NDP lost big the last federal elections and Singh had to resign. Lo and behold, degrowth can also be funny. With some of my buddies, we organized a charity event as a comedy night titled Roast Growth, alternative comedy for alternative economics. The event was sold out and we also had the wait list. Some of the comedians, including myself, talked directly about degrowth. The audience wanted more events like this. In conversations with folks that already feel there's something wrong with capitalism, I often encounter three types of people. The first type is the avid supporter who understands what degrowth is about, wants to be engaged with the movement, and wants to help. The second type is the agnostic who wants to learn more and is not opposed to the idea but is also not enthusiastic. The third type is the unconvinced who does not like the framing put forward by degrowth. They either do not like the word degrowth because they think it has a negative connotation and they want to focus on positive or neutral narratives, or they do not want to embrace a contrarian position against the status quo because they have some privilege to defend, or they just don't like conflict, or they think capitalism can be reformed. In general, I have met a lot of activists in Canada who cannot handle a battle with the capitalist establishment. They preferred the typical Canadian position of conflict aversion and hope to change the system by escaping it with some sort of alternative lifestyle. Some are the let others do it first type. Some people think that the heavy lifting should be done by professionals such as lawyers, researchers, foundations, or not-for-profit organizations. So what can we think about all these contradicting signals? Is Canada ready for degrowth? Canada often feels like a giant sleeping grizzly bear that is constantly being poked at by the raucous United States. The Canadian bear sits atop a massive pool of resources from which it sips faster and faster from a tube that gets thicker and thicker. Indigenous First Nations are ridiculed and ignored. Their lands continue to be stolen for the purpose of capital accumulation. What is interesting in this polite Canadian context is that when I said in a recent talk that Canada needs an ethic of limits, which means a cap on wealth at $5 million and the cap on annual personal income at roughly $260,000, nobody pushed back or objected. But my audience was not the audience of the Canadian Club Toronto. I talked to a friendly crowd which invited me to speak. Mark Carney and Canadian venture capitalists, they talk about the need for economic growth, productivity growth, growth in trade, and so on. They do not tell us why all of that is necessary. They do not even dare to mention the structural design of the economic system. Why is property linked to power in proportion? Why do businesses have unelected managers and executives? Why is property taken away from its owners and converted with impunity into capital? Why do we need to grow the economy forever? What's the purpose of all this? Ideas that would really improve the quality of life of Canadians are never mentioned by mainstream media and the status quo elites. Working less, housing as a human right, pensions that do not depend on the whims of the stock market, growing food without fossil fuels, free public transportation, a guaranteed job for all citizens to end unemployment forever, ending the rule of the super rich with wealth taxes and wealth caps, public community banks to finance local businesses, capping the consumption of energy and materials to fair equal amount for all citizens, banning the local production and the import of products that cannot be recycled or are toxic to the environment. The list is long. I think limitarianism, as an ethic of limiting the amount of wealth a human can hold, is a core requirement for maintaining social order deep into the future. There are some ethical assumptions built into our economic system that need to be re-evaluated immediately, such as the connection between merit and unlimited rewards. The economy is supposed to serve the needs of people, not to invent fake needs for the purpose of profit. This applies to technology, to fast fashion, to big cars, and big houses. Degrowth in Canada in 2026 feels like the bear might be waking up at any time, but instead it just snoozed the clock for one more year of sleeping and sipping millions of barrels of oil. The Canadian government is captured by the growth narrative because, frankly, they cannot do any better. The capitalist status quo is still too strong. At the level of communities, some opposition is organizing little events here and there. Globally, the No Kings marches just showed that there's massive opposition against authoritarianism. But to translate that energy into recognizing that capitalism predicated on perpetual growth is going to end organized civilization takes more work. Canadian environmental groups and all groups that recognize the problem with capitalism must add degrowth to their strategies immediately and focus on dismantling the causal structures of the economic system. Everything else may be a waste of time, including banning single-use plastics, while the government ships ammunition to fuel wars, or while the super rich fly on their private jets to a golf match in California. With all the wars happening, with the erratic US plutocratic government, with Mark Carney appearing to stand up to defend the importance of medium-sized countries, with the rules-based order being declared finished, it is quite normal to feel hopeless, anxious, or simply detached. We can analyze what the elites are doing until our face turns blue. There are oceans of analysts, oceans of podcasts, and smart articles. I think we should try something different this time. First, refuse to participate in capitalism on a personal level if we can. This includes buying stupid things, feeding social media with our attention, and even doing overtime for capitalist corporations. Second, learn to understand what is going on, if we can. I don't mean reading Marx, which is too difficult and useless for our daily needs. Question the fundamental assumptions of capitalism: unlimited wealth, no democracy at work, theft of property, and the quest for infinite growth. Third, join groups of like-minded people with a purpose, even if that purpose is just to learn how to live differently. In each category, you can choose your level of engagement. The stakes are pretty high. So let's go, Canada. We can do this. We can politely ask capitalism to step down while we use degrowth to make this land beautiful and just for all humans and beings living on it. Thank you for supporting my research on Ko-fi and Patreon. You may join my supporters at these links. Friends, we can win, but only together. We have the solutions. We must continue to organize. Increase the peace.